Chapter 5. Knowledgeable Uncertainty and the Specter of Failure. Failure structures the world of security. A successful day in this world is one during which nothing happens. If an event does occur and is successfully brought under control, without so much damage, it is expected that the work of the professionals involved should not be publicly remarked. No need to frighten people unnecessarily, it will be said. There is no need to give attention to the perpetrators, which might inspire other attacks, it will also be said. On the other hand, a successful attack is noisy, costly, and potentially career-ruining. Following a terrorist attack, motivations must be uncovered and blame must be apportioned. It is easy to blame anonymous institutions, so police, emergency services, and others are often charged with failure. From a certain contemporary vantage, these institutions indeed did fail. Syllogistically, security professionals were expected to keep the peace. The peace was broken. Security professionals failed. QED. The major premise, the idea that a collection of bureaucracies is responsible for something as nebulous as security, deserves special attention. Security has meant different things over the ages, but today, security has been literally institutionalized. Not just institutionalized, security has been professionalized, resting on a body of knowledge and a program of training by a dedicated elite, hence secret college. In this imaginary, whatever an attack might mean, it is also an institutional failure. Conversely, from the institutional perspective, the possibility of failure is a spectral presence that hovers over all decisions and interactions, and over careers, too. And there is something deeper, a sense of impossible responsibility. As an ethnographer, aware of the limits of my technical knowledge, I spent long hours in the company of police who needed to concretize their roles by thinking about what could go wrong. They were searching not just for solutions, but also for deeper answers. One day, as I sat in a patrol SUV driving around the airport perimeter with a seasoned officer, we intercepted some children playing on restricted property. A faux interrogation was greeted with comments about the officer's inability to effectively pursue them on foot. But after he let the children go with a friendly warning, he pointed out the window to the back of one of the terminals, which was just visible on the horizon, beyond a dual carriageway off-ramp choked with cars, coaches, and public buses. "I can't protect this. How could I?" he said, before driving away. The possibility of future horror, maybe soon, makes the present inchoately anxious. Still, one must carry on. How are such bad futures, which futures, to be avoided? Making institutions, and therefore individuals, responsible for security concretizes and specifies these questions. In the contemporary moment, at least, fear of what harms an evildoer might inflict is a bureaucratic task. Security organizations imagine, worry, anticipate. Perhaps potential terrorists can be identified, plots uncovered. Recall, from Chapter 2, the concept of paranoia within reason, the logical multiplication of fears of what might be with no end in sight. If security is a bureaucratic task, then paranoia within reason means that the institutional appetite for information is insatiable. CCTVs bloom like weeds. It is unclear how successful such intelligence efforts are, or even how to think about what would constitute success. In some circles, it is argued that this is not the golden age of terrorism, and that violence in general has declined in historical terms. It is also argued that the interconnection of sensationalist media highlights awareness of terrorism. Many terrorist attacks are foiled. One might argue that the security community is doing a good job, that the glass is more than half full. There is much to be said about the details of each of these arguments, but not here. For present purposes, even assuming that these arguments are more or less true, they miss a fundamental point. Surely attacks have not ceased. It is always possible that worse things await. Paranoia within reason remains, not just as intellectual possibility, but as institutional reality, even if the glass is half full. Nobody expects that security will be declared accomplished, barriers taken down, teams let go to find other work, perhaps in the hospitality industries. By the same token, the security community will continue to collect massive amounts of information, will try to anticipate the next attack, none of which is to say that the secret college's thirst for data should go unchallenged. Similar things might be said about the thirst for data in the private sector. It is to say that the understanding of security as, in large part, a question of knowledge appears to be very durable. Hence the emphasis we have placed on knowing. But it is not clear what the secret college has learned from all of its information, or to put it differently, it is not clear how data informs the practice of security. Some failures are notable. One of the most quoted lines from the report of the National Commission on Terrorist Attacks upon the United States, the official name for the 9/11 Commission report, is that U.S. security agencies suffered from a failure of the imagination. Without devoting much time to thinking, this analysis seems commonsensical, satisfying even. After all, since Pearl Harbor and throughout the Cold War, the United States devoted massive intellectual and physical resources to preventing surprise attacks, from the analytical efforts of game theorists and code breakers to the early warning stations we raid like giant ears prayed for sounds made by Soviets. How could all of these efforts have failed so spectacularly? Perhaps, behind all the secrecy and swagger, security professionals simply lack imagination. This is why the 9/11 Commission's analysis delivers such a satisfying answer. Therein, the security apparatus appears to be useless and those working within it to be dullards. A more careful reading of the Commission's analysis suggests that things are more complicated. Before the 9/11 attacks, various agencies certainly played out scenarios and exercises that pointed to the precise vulnerabilities that were later exposed, and in retrospect, the terrorists themselves seem to be offering helpful pointers. In 1993, Ramzi Youssef attacked the World Trade Center with a car bomb. Later, Youssef joined with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed in the 1995 Bojinka plot, an extraordinary effort to simultaneously bring down 11 airliners en route to the United States. So, one man was involved with both target, the World Trade Center, and method, planes. Youssef's comrade, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, went on to confess, under torture, to being the mastermind behind 9/11. The pattern seems clear, but, apparently, the imagination needed to appreciate the pattern was lacking. Another danger sign, the full significance of which was missed at the time. August 2001, the suspicious behavior of Zacharias Masai at a Minnesota flight school led to his arrest. A report went to the intelligence community titled, "Islamic Extremist Learns to Fly." One is tempted to ask, just how much imagination was required? Those charged with foresight are always partially blind, while hindsight blesses one with accurate vision. Roberta Walshutter's celebrated study, Pearl Harbor, casts the problem thus. It is much easier after the event to sort the relevant from the irrelevant signals. After an event, of course, a signal is always crystal clear. We can now see what disaster it was signaling since the disaster has occurred, but before the event it is obscure and pregnant with conflicting meanings. This, of course, is a broad problem for humanity, as nature gives all societies the intellectual resources to imagine wrongly, guaranteeing regular failure. This problem is especially sharp, however, for those modern bureaucracies charged with keeping populations safe from harm. The 9/11 Commission echoes Walshutter's careful analysis. The methods for detecting and then warning of surprise attack that the U.S. government has so painstakingly developed in the decades after Pearl Harbor did not fail. Instead, they were not really tried. They were not employed to analyze the enemy that, as the 20th century closed, was most likely to launch a surprise attack directly against the United States. Failure of imagination is at best a shorthand. As an intellectual matter, the attacks could have been imagined, and indeed were, notably by the attackers themselves. But could the security community, comprised of different organizations, have been expected to come together over speculation about this specific danger, as opposed to others? That is, imagination here is collective, not the individual imagination romantically associated with artists. Imagining the 9/11 attacks and then stopping them would have required institutional coordination that did not take place. The information was out there. As an intellectual matter, as a matter of abstract thought, recognizing and foiling the 9/11 plot is not that hard, especially in hindsight. But bureaucracies inscribe thoughts into institutions and careers, raising organizational problems. On September 11th, those problems were fatal, and the 9/11 report spends much of its 585 pages attempting to think through an organizational architecture that would be less vulnerable. Fortunately, most terrorist acts are also failures. Attacks are usually fumbled, foiled, and often farcical from beginning to end. The first suicide bombing in history, the anarchist attack on Alexander II, was most likely never intended to be fatal for the attacker. The Fenians also had their share of disasters. The plot to murder Queen Victoria during her jubilee failed because the assassins missed the boat, literally, to England. During the 20th century, each wave of terrorism, nationalists, fascists, Marxist-Leninists, or religious, came as tragedy and reappeared as farce. In 2016, to give just one striking example, an al-Shabaab radical detonated a bomb concealed in a laptop on Dallo Airlines 159, 14,000 feet over Somalia, blowing a small hole in the fuselage. He was immediately sucked out and fell to his death, the only casualty. The list of errors in judgment, insufficient technical knowledge, and poor tactics seems endless. Some plots are foiled before they ever take shape, sometimes with the assistance of the security services. On other occasions, the lack of basic technical knowledge held by the attackers is staggering. Physics, the 24-hour clock, doors that open outwards, these are all the natural enemies of the would-be terrorist. Moreover, failure compounds. Anxiety in the face of suicidal attack is alleviated with narcotics, the effects of which are hard to factor into planning, and poor planning leads to panic in the face of unanticipated events. Indeed, this is often the best argument in favor of theatrical security performances. The sight of security is often sufficient to alter the outcome of a terrorist attack. And even in cases in which the attackers were professional, extraordinary errors do occur. The 1995 Bojinka plot, which aimed to take 10,000 lives by downing 11 aircraft, failed because the terrorist accidentally started a chemical fire in his apartment. He was arrested after he tripped over a tree root while attempting to flee. Relying on the failure of others, however, is no more sensible for a defender than relying on the assurance of academics that, from a sufficient altitude, violence is decreasing. Sometimes attackers succeed. They might even get better, in the sense of grow more dangerous. Security services in Europe, North America, and elsewhere fear the day that they will meet their match in the form of trained killers. A curious dynamic is at play in counterterrorism. One must train to respond successfully to enemies who have not yet appeared, but who might. But they also may never even exist. The oddity of this dynamic is expressed in innumerable military histories. As Cohen and Gooch summarize, the job of anticipation is often thought to have the task of foretelling an enemy's actions. It is difficult enough for an intelligence organization to grasp the enemy's current state, to include his methods of operation and tactical preferences. The task of predicting the future, as opposed to issuing a warning, is a wholly unreasonable one. Moreover, effective anticipation involves not only estimating the enemy's likely actions, but comparing them to one's own ways of war. For the defender, nightmarish possibilities haunt the waking world. The fact that terrorists are on average rather poor at their jobs brings little comfort. An attack might succeed because of blind luck, or attackers may learn enough about their target to expose a vulnerability. Worse, security professionals may have to respond to trained attackers or never before seen weapons. In such a case, their methods and systems may work, and yet the attack will still succeed because the adversary is just that good. In such a case, the security professional will stand accused of a failure of the imagination, of not seeing it coming. Many, perhaps most, senior security experts know by heart the text of the chilling IRA note to the British government following the failed assassination attempt on Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. Today, we were unlucky, but remember, we only have to be lucky once. You will have to be lucky always. Needless to say, the secret college is not always lucky. Recall also from Chapter 2 the epistemological problem at the heart of security. Much may be imagined, and things happen which have not been imagined. Security is thus a horizon of thought, an infinite regress. In principle, the problem of security cannot be solved, but only managed. Now that such ideas have been bureaucratically concretized, the regress plays out in the institutions comprising the secret college. Information is necessary. There can never be too much. Acquire as much as possible. Information is never enough. Uncertainty remains. The regress is infinite. As the number of players and the quanta of data multiply, interpretation and coordination problems arise, and the needle in the haystack is often missed. Such contradictions foster a robust, if anxious, institutional structure. More information is needed, but the problem cannot be solved. There is always more work to be done. Attention should be paid to the phrase, cannot be solved. This is meant quite literally. In confronting the uncertainty inherent in the future, no bureaucracy can be sure of itself. Security is decided all the time, but is in principle undecidable. A better effort may provide better answers, but such answers nonetheless will be incomplete, at least in the world of imaginable and unimagined possibilities. Security practice is therefore fundamentally compromised by the bureaucracy's knowledge or suppression of its own limitations. The infinite regress is not only an empirical question having to do with the competence or lack thereof of any given bureaucracy at any specific place and time. This is not a problem to be solved by a better bureaucracy, some advance in expertise or technology. Struggling to cross the horizon of fear is the essential work of security, whatever specific measures may be demanded by context. To quip, confronting the always uncertain future is the never-done business of security. The rest is tactics. Indeed, any bureaucracy that tries to answer for an uncertain future is in a similar situation, only less dramatically so. To understand security in terms of a theory of knowledge, an essential reality independent of material circumstances, is a very Weberian thing to do. For Max Weber, the point of the interpretive social sciences was verstehen, which meant to see the facts of the world through an interpretive lens of some general idea. Famous examples include the idea of bureaucratic rationalization, or of the state as the holder of a monopoly of legitimate force upon a territory, both of which are preoccupations of this book. A similar approach, perhaps familiar, is taken by Carl Schmitt in defining politics in terms of the willingness to fight against an enemy, and then later in terms of the state of exception. Clausewitz's definition of war as politics by other means is another example. Weber, and indeed a great deal of the German intellectual tradition, operates through critique, which manages to be both empirically sensitive and philosophically powerful at the same time. Facts are understood in terms of ideas. Conversely, ideas inform facts, and especially for Weber, social reality. Weber, like any educated German, self-consciously understood critique vis-a-vis Kant's domination of the German, and indeed much of the Enlightenment, imagination, the echoes of which can be heard clearly in contemporary public discourse. A more patient scholar might trace critique back further, through Kant's pietist upbringing to Luther's criticism of Catholicism in terms of fundamental tenets of Christianity. Weber's engagement with Luther is explicit. For example, the notion of vocation and the ultimately existential stance of the scholar, for whom facts themselves can never lead to understanding, and so he must at some point say, "Here I stand." One might go back still further, through Luther's Augustinian education and subsequent scholarship to Augustine himself, and from there to Plato, a thought which, due to the brevity of life, will not be substantiated here. What is critical for present purposes is that Weber's work leads to understandings and articulations of society that are central to the interpretive social sciences, and indeed to public discourse. Weber, like Shakespeare, is full of cliches. In particular, when we discuss bureaucracy and the administrative state, the state and the use of force, and modernity itself, we cannot help but echo Weber. Yet critique must always be done anew, as circumstances present themselves and must be understood, coped with by humans, including intellectuals. Weber said that the point of the social sciences is not truth as such, but the final truth we are able to achieve, that is existential struggle. Quote, "to see how long we can stand it," close quote. One of the demands of our day is to understand what security means, what it means to live under a realm of security, especially including counterterrorism. Ethnographic research, reflected back upon itself, a portrait of the security official and especially his typical problem, the infinite regress, has emerged. This portrait is at some angle to Weber's picture of the bureaucrat, especially as it has come down to us. To simplify, Weber understood bureaucracy in terms of rules, rationality, clarity. We see security in terms of uncertainty. Reframing bureaucracy as consequences for how we understand the state and the contemporary itself. A Weberian approach thus has led us to conceptions at some variance with Weber's, and indeed with regnant assumptions in the social sciences. Our reckoning with such large questions must wait, because our portrait of the secret college and its world is far from complete. Having just discussed the uncertain future, it is time to turn our attention to the contested past.